Thank you for joining me on this adventure. Your presence means the world to me. Welcome to our video on trout cod. We're thrilled to have you here. The trout cod Maccullochella macquariensis, or blue-nose cod, is a large predatory freshwater fish of the genus Maccullochella and the family Percichthyidae, closely related to the Murray cod. It was originally widespread in the southeast corner of the Murray-Darling River system in Australia, but is now an endangered species. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, when trout cod were widely recognized as a separate species by commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, riverside residents and fisheries scientists, they were generally known as blue-nose cod or simply blue-nose, particularly in Victoria. In some parts of New South Wales, however, they were also known as trout cod, and this common name was adopted when the species status of the fish was finally confirmed by genetic studies in the early years. This choice of official common name was perhaps unfortunate. It has been suggested that blue-nose cod is a more appropriate name, as the name trout cod causes confusion amongst the Australian public. Trout cod are an Australian native freshwater fish. They are not a hybrid between Murray cod and introduced trout species. Trout cod are a listed species on a number of different registers, including endangered under the New South Wales Fisheries Management Act 1994, the Australian Commonwealth's Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act 1999, the Australian Capital Territories Nature Conservation Act 1980, and by the World Conservation Union (IUCN). They are also listed as threatened under the Victorian Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act 1998. Fossils of genus Maccullochella can be found from Miocene epoch from about 23.03 to 5.332 million years ago to recent age, while the species Maccullochella macquariensis is present from Lower Pliocene to recent age. As we transition, let's shed light on description and its relevance to our ongoing exploration. Trout cod have been reliably recorded to at least 80 and 16, but there are some credible anecdotal accounts of larger specimens. Trout cod are broadly similar to the Murray cod, however there are some distinct differences in morphology and coloration. Trout cod are a small to medium grouper-like fish with a deep, elongated body that is round in cross-section. In contrast to Murray cod, trout cod have a pointed head with the top jaw overhanging the bottom jaw, and the slope of the head is straight. The eyes are slightly larger and more prominent than in Murray cod. The head tends to be free of speckling, however a distinct dark stripe through the eye is usually present. Trout cod are cream to light grey on their ventral belly surfaces. Their back and flanks are most commonly bluish-grey in color, overlain with irregular black speckling, but this can be highly variable depending on the habitat specimens come from, and can range from almost white to light grey-green, light brown, dark brown or almost black. The black speckling on the back and flanks is consistent, however. The spiny dorsal fin is moderate in height and is partially separated by a notch from the high, rounded soft dorsal fin. Soft dorsal, anal and caudal tail fins are all large and rounded, and are light grey to dark grey or black with distinct white edges. The large, rounded pectoral fins are usually similar in colour to flanks. The pelvic fins are large and angular and set forward of the pectoral fins. The leading white-coloured rays on the pelvic fins split into two trailing white filaments, while the pelvic fins themselves are usually a translucent cream or light grey. Smaller trout cod tend to be more slender than equivalent-sized Murray cod. Curiously, very large trout cod appear to develop deeper shoulders than equivalent-sized Murray cod. While trout cod were only conclusively described as a separate species to Murray cod in 1972, commercial and recreational fishermen and early fishery biologists were in no doubt that there were two separate species of cod in the Murray-Darling system from the Ers onwards, and noted the trout cod's different appearance and spawning biology and preference for cooler, faster-flowing water and upland habitats. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, trout cod were recognized by the scientific community as separate species due to differing habitat preferences, morphological differences, especially the much smaller size at sexual maturity, and differing spawning times. It was really only post-World War I, by which time trout cod had become very rare or even extinct in much of their original range, that the erroneous idea that they were really just anomalous Murray cod gained any currency. Get ready for an enlightening exploration as we dig into habitat and understand its role in the broader context. Although there was a very substantial overlap in range, trout cod are essentially a more specialist upland sister species to Murray cod. Therefore, the trout cod's main habitats were the larger upland rivers and creeks, which they usually co-inhabited with musquary perch and one or both of the blackfish species. Historical research is confirming a primarily upland distribution for trout cod, recent governmental literature lacking such historical research and suggesting trout cod are primarily a lowland fish species must be considered inaccurate. Division into specialist upland and primarily lowland species is a relatively common phenomenon in native fish genera of the Murray-Darling and East Coast systems, with other notable pairs shown in the following table. Upland lowland musquary perch, Musquaria australasica golden perch, Musquaria amiga Australian bass, Musquaria nove Maccullochella estuary perch, Musquaria colinorum two-spined blackfish, Gadopsis bispinosis river blackfish, Gadopsis marmoratus mountain Galaxias species complex, Galaxias sp. Flathead Galaxias, Galaxias rostratus. Trout cod are often found close to cover and in faster currents and in cooler waters than Murray cod. Their diet is essentially the same as Murray cod, with adjustment made for size, eating mainly other fishes, freshwater mussels, crustaceans, aquatic insects, small mammals and waterfowl. However, recent anecdotal evidence suggests terrestrial insects made up a significant proportion of the trout cod's diet in upland rivers and streams. In the surviving Murray River population, trout cod tend to stick to areas of deep water near banks, around snags, rocks or other large structure. However, historical accounts of trout cod in upland river habitats stated that trout cod were often found in shallow riffles and runs. Generally speaking, radio-tracked trout cod in the surviving Murray River population have small home ranges and may be a species which does not move away from their original base, except during the breeding season, when they follow a common trend in Murray-Darling fish of migrating upstream prior to spawning. It seems likely that trout cod follow a similar pattern to Murray cod and return post-spawning to their original location. In the upcoming section, we'll be shining a light on diet. Trout cod are carnivores and feed on other fish, crustaceans such as crayfish, yabbies and freshwater shrimp, as well as aquatic and terrestrial insects. Larvae are pelagic fish and eat zooplankton. In the next segment, we'll be exploring reproduction and its implications for our subject matter. Trout cod reach sexual maturity at 3 to 5 years, which corresponds to about 35 in males and 43 in females. Trout cod reach sexual maturity at a smaller size than Murray cod, which is an adaptation to the rocky, low-nutrient and often quite small upland habitats trout cod were found in. Spawning of trout cod has never been observed in the wild and is not well understood. It is believed to be essentially the same as Murray cod, but occurs about 3 weeks earlier and at significantly lower temperatures in waters shared by the two species. Trout cod are believed to spawn at temperatures as low as 15 degrees in upland rivers, using rocks as a spawning substrate. These are also clear adaptations to cool, rocky upland river habitats. Significantly, and unlike Murray cod, trout cod will not breed in earthen dam brood ponds, another indication that trout cod are a more specialist upland species than Murray cod. Artificial breeding programs being conducted for the species recovery use hormone injections to induce ovulation in naturally ripe fish in spring. Trout cod will hybridize with Murray cod, and so for recovery projects it is important that Murray cod are not stocked into sites where trout cod and Murray cod are not already coexisting sympatrically. In this section, we'll be deep diving into conservation, unraveling its complexities and uncovering valuable insights. Trout cod were once common and abundant throughout the Murray-Darling Basin but are now listed on the IUCN as endangered due to overfishing, degradation of habitat and the introduction of invasive trout species. The species is now totally protected. Only one wild, naturally occurring trout cod population remains in the Murray River in the region where the river is basically an extended transition zone from upland river habitat to lowland river habitat. In more lowland river habitats, river regulation and habitat degradation through activities like desnagging and overfishing are probably the primary causes of decline. Heavy predation by introduced redfin perch, which were present in great numbers in the lowland reaches of the southern MDB for several decades, also played a large role in the decline of native fish in those reaches, including trout cod. The possibility that trout cod populations in upland habitats were the ultimate source of trout cod populations in lowland habitats, i.e. source and sink populations over long time frames, i.e. decades, cannot be discounted. However, historical accounts such as those from Joantry indicate lowland trout cod populations were secondary populations in secondary habitats, clearly in the minority to more abundant primarily lowland native fish species such as Murray cod, golden perch and silver perch. Therefore, it is doubtful whether strong trout cod populations can ever be established in lowland habitats, and therefore the issue of upland habitats and the return of some upland habitats in trout-free form needs to be addressed in trout cod conservation. Historical evidence indicates trout cod and macquarie perch were abundant in most of the larger upland rivers and streams in the southeast corner of the Murray-Darling River system, and that these upland river habitats were their primary habitats. The extinction of trout cod populations in every one of its upland river habitats is an unresolved issue. Contrary to popular belief, many of these upland rivers still contain significant stretches of unregulated, high-quality habitat. Wild dams, thermal pollution, siltation, and other forms of habitat modification and degradation are responsible for the trout cod's extinction in many upland river habitats. It is almost certain that the reason for the trout cod's extinction in higher quality upland river habitats that have not experienced serious modification and degradation is the heavy domination of these habitats by introduced trout species, which are aggressive, predatory fish. Every single larger upland river and stream in southeastern Australia is dominated by introduced trout species, rainbow trout and brown trout, with many having been continually stocked with introduced trout species for more than a century, and not a single larger upland river or stream in southeastern Australia has been reserved in a trout-free state for larger upland native fish species. The effects of this course of action by fishery departments has been stark, and catastrophic events such as drought or bushfire, after which introduced trout species were restocked but upland native fish were not restocked, have shifted the balance further. The net result is that a number of upland native fish species, including trout cod and macquarie perch, have completely died out or nearly so in their upland river habitats in the wild, apparently unable to cope with massive predation on their larvae juveniles by introduced trout species and unable to cope with massive competition from introduced trout species for food and habitat at all life stages. I regret not knowing the name of a man I met at Tom Grodin Station, a Victorian property on the Indi River near Mount Kosciuszko, who told me that he worked at Tom Grodin before he enlisted in the army and went to the First World War. He had fished the Indi before he left, and it carried a great number of bluenose, white-eye and greasees. While he was at war, he even dreamt about fishing the Indi. When he came home, he returned to his old job at Tom Grodin and announced that before he did any work, he wanted to go fishing. Very quickly he caught a fish about a foot in length, the like of which he had never seen before. So intrigued was he by this strange spotted but nicely shaped fish that he immediately took it to the homestead, thinking it was something quite unique. At the homestead, he was told it was a brown trout. From that time both the white eye and the blue nose numbers went into decline, while the numbers of brown and rainbow trout increased. To my mind, this man did do something remarkable. He had set a very positive time frame of a changeover of fish species in the Indie River. Heads and Tails, Recollections of a Fisheries and Wildlife Officer. Scientific studies to document and quantify the impacts of introduced trout on trout cod and macquarie perch in upland river habitats, and develop a more scientific approach to trout cod conservation and re-establishment efforts, including in upland river habitats, are desperately needed. Given the strong cultural cringe towards introduced trout in the wider community and the management bias towards introduced trout amongst fishery agencies, these studies may be some way off. Two small populations of trout cod that have shown indications of breeding have been created by hatchery stockings in the lowland reaches of Murrumbidgee River at Gundagai and Narrandera, although it is far from clear whether these populations will be self-sustaining in the long term. Many other stockings of trout cod have failed, which is not surprising considering the small number of trout cod fingerlings stocked, and the fact that trout cod were frequently stocked into upland river habitats where introduced trout species were heavily entrenched, and in at least one case, were carried in conjunction with far larger stockings of introduced trout. A semi-natural population exists in a stretch of the very small upland Seven Creeks, which was established by translocations of trout cod and macquarie perch above a set of falls in the Ers. The Seven Creeks population is not a wholly artificial population, or a wholly unrepresentative habitat, as often claimed, as some of the trout cod translocated came literally from the base of the falls. Remember to follow me on social media for behind-the-scenes content and updates.